The engagement dinner turned cold as his mother stood up and sneered. "My son will marry you over my dead body." My husband chuckled and replied, "She's just joking." Mostly. I swirled my wine and smiled. Good thing I have a backup plan. Her face twisted in horror as the waiter delivered a special envelope. "My name is Rachel and I'm engaged to Derek. We live in Chicago. Derek is amazing, the most patient, caring person you could ever meet. But his mother? That's a whole different story. Her name is Margot, and Margot has hated me since the day we met. She doesn't hide it either. From the very first time Derek introduced me, she decided I wasn't good enough for no real reason. I wasn't rich enough. I wasn't from the right kind of family. She said my job was cute but temporary. For the record, I've worked in the same hospital as a nurse for almost 8 years. Every time I've seen her, she's made little comments. First, I ignored them. Then they got worse. She started doing things on purpose. Forgetting my name, giving me cheap, obviously regifted presents on holidays, rolling her eyes at anything I said during conversations, talking over me at dinners. You get the idea. And Derek? He tried his best to keep the peace, but Margot doesn't listen to anyone. She's the type of woman who thinks everyone else is beneath her. She talks over waiters, insults cashiers, and thinks her opinion is the only one that matters. I knew she wasn't going to like the fact we were getting married, but I thought maybe for one night she'd just behave herself. Spoiler. She didn't. We decided to have a small engagement dinner. Nothing big, just family, 12 people. We booked a private room at Ever in Chicago, Derek's favorite spot. It's not cheap. This was supposed to be something special. Derek's parents, my parents, his sister, her husband, my brother, a couple of close cousins. The night started off fine, better than fine actually. Margot barely said anything. She didn't even make one of her usual little digs for the first hour. I was starting to think maybe, just maybe, she was turning over a new leaf. She wasn't. Dinner was wrapping up. Everyone was full, people were smiling. We made it through the appetizers, the entree, and several bottles of wine without incident. Then the desserts came out and Margot stood up. She stood up so suddenly that her chair scraped loudly against the floor. Everyone turned and looked at her. You could feel the mood shift immediately. She tapped her spoon against her glass. Ding, ding, ding. She didn't wait for silence. She just started talking, and what came out of her mouth left everyone completely stunned. "I just want to say my son will marry you over my dead body." Just like that, loud, clear, direct. No one moved. No one said a word. The air was just gone. You ever have one of those moments where you can literally hear your own heartbeat? Yeah, that was this. I looked at Derek. He was frozen for a second, his fork halfway to his mouth. Then he actually laughed. Just joking mostly. He said mostly that I was doing a lot of work, and Margot didn't laugh. She didn't smile. She just stared at me like she wanted me to disappear. I realized in that exact moment that she would never accept me, ever. Not in 100 years. I was done pretending to play nice. I took a sip of my wine. I didn't even rush it. I kept it slow on purpose and I said, "Good thing I have a backup plan." I watched her face change. You know the look when someone realizes the control they thought they had is slipping? That was it. The waiter came over right on time and set an envelope in front of her. Margot stared at it. "What's this?" "Go ahead," I said. "Open it." She didn't move right away. Everyone else was silent. I could feel them watching, wondering what the hell was happening. Margot finally picked up the envelope. She slid her finger under the seal and pulled out the papers inside. She started reading, and her face went from confused to pale in about 3 seconds flat. See, what Margot didn't know is that I'd been doing my homework. Derek's sister had warned me a while back that Margot had some questionable side hustles. I didn't think much of it at first, but the more I got to know her, the more I started wondering. So I dug around and it turns out Margot wasn't just renting out a few extra rooms. Nope, she was running multiple illegal Airbnb properties under fake names, dodging taxes, big numbers, big risk, and very, very illegal. Thanks to a friend of mine who works in real estate law, I had everything. Addresses, bank transfers, fake names, fake accounts, years of it. And in that envelope, I'd printed out a full report, every single detail, along with a completed letter addressed to the IRS, pre-stamped and ready to go. Margot kept reading. I could see her hands shaking a little. "This is..." She started. "You leave me alone, you don't cause problems, you stay out of our marriage, and this never sees the light of day. No one knew what to say. Derek just sat there. He didn't even ask me what was going on. I think deep down he already knew his mom was up to no good. Margot didn't speak for once in her life. She didn't have anything to say. She folded the papers back into the envelope, set it down, and then she sat back in her chair. For the rest of that dinner, she didn't say another word. Not even when the check came, not even when we stood up to leave. And I have never felt more peace at a family event than I did for the rest of that night. I thought that was it. I thought the envelope would shut her down for good. I thought we'd finally bought ourselves some peace. I was wrong. 2 days after the dinner, Derek got a call from his mom, and of course she didn't call me. She went straight to him. According to Derek, she just wanted to talk. But Derek's face told me everything before he even hung up. She's demanding we come over to her house, he said. I asked why. He shrugged. She says she needs to clear the air. Clear the air? Please. But I agreed to. I wanted to see what her next move was. Margot lives in one of those massive old houses out in Evanston. Big yard, iron gate. The whole thing feels like you're walking onto the set of a movie where the rich widow has probably buried 2 husbands under the rose bushes. We got there around 3 p.m. Margot opened the door herself. No fake smile, no small talk, just a stiff nod and a wave for us to follow her into the living room. On the coffee table was the envelope, untouched, still sealed shut. Except it wasn't the same envelope. It was a new one. She slid it across the table toward me. If you're going to play games, sweetheart, she said, you better make sure you're ready to lose. I didn't even reach for it. I just stared at her. Derek looked back and forth between us. What's going on? He asked. Margot smiled. Your fiancé seems to think she's clever, so I thought I'd remind her I'm not exactly helpless either. I opened the envelope. Inside were photos of me leaving work, going into our apartment, grabbing coffee with friends. What the hell is this? I asked. Margot shrugged. Just making sure I know who's around. My son can't be too careful. It hit me like a brick. She'd been having me followed. This was the part that finally broke Derek. Up until now, he'd always tried to smooth things over. He didn't want to fight with his mom. But this crossed the line. You're insane, Derek said. What is wrong with you? Margot didn't flinch. I'm protecting you. You think you know everything about her? Maybe you don't. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. You're having me followed because you don't like me? I said. Are you serious? She didn't answer. She just sat back in her chair like she'd won something. That's when I realized this wasn't just about disliking me. Margot had decided she was going to ruin me, and this was just the start. The next morning I woke up to emails from someone I didn't know. An anonymous email address. You should check the county records for your future mother-in-law's house, it said. That was all it said, no name, no details. At first I thought it was a prank, but something about it stuck with me. So I checked and holy hell, Margot wasn't just committing tax fraud with her Airbnb scam. She was deep in debt. Like drowning. Like this house is 3 months away from foreclosure level of debt. Suddenly, everything made sense. The fake kindness at the start of dinner, the random attacks, the stalking. She wasn't just trying to protect her son. She was scared. Scared that I was going to take away the only stable thing she had left. Derek. Because Derek, bless his patient heart, has been helping her with her bills for years. He's been giving her money behind my back, paying her mortgage until she gets back on her feet, which apparently is code for forever. She thought once we got married, her free ride was over. She thought I was going to cut her off, and to be honest, she was right. I didn't tell Derek what I found right away, not because I wanted to keep secrets, but because I needed time to think, what do you even do in a situation like this? Here's his mom actively trying to destroy our relationship, digging through my personal life, stalking me with private investigators, and pulling every dirty trick in the book. Now I knew the real reason Margot didn't want Derek marrying me. She thought I'd stop her little operation, and she was right. But now I was starting to wonder if the envelope I gave her at dinner. Maybe I didn't go far enough. Maybe Margot needed to know what real consequences looked like. Because if she thought I was just going to sit back and let this continue, she had no idea who she was messing with. I thought the debt was the full story. I thought I had it all figured out until the second email came from the same anonymous email address. Check the property records. Look at who actually owns her house. What now? So I dug deeper and guess what? The house wasn't even in Margot's name. It was in Derek's. Yeah, somehow years ago, Margot had convinced Derek to put the entire property under his name, probably when she first started drowning in debt and needed to protect it from being taken. I don't know how she talked him into it. Maybe it was when he was fresh out of college and still thought his mom could do no wrong. But legally Derek owned the house, all of it, and Derek had no idea. I know that's what you're thinking. Apparently, Margot had gotten him to sign a stack of papers one year when he was helping her refinance. She said it was just standard stuff, he never read the fine print. Now, if the bank came to collect on her debt, guess who they'd be coming for? Not her, Derek. Suddenly the stalking, the weird threats, the "you'll never marry my son" speech. It all clicked into place like the world's worst puzzle. Margot wasn't just scared of losing Derek to me. She was terrified that once we were married, I'd find out the truth and make Derek sell the house to pay off her debts. Honestly, she was wrong because the moment I found out, that's exactly what I wanted to do. I told Derek, sat him down, showed him the emails, the records, the whole mess. I half expected him not to believe me, but as soon as I showed him the documents, I watched the realization hit him like a truck. "She's been using me," he said finally. Now we were on the same page. But what do you do when your own mother has been quietly stealing your name and putting you on the hook for hundreds of thousands in debt? I needed a plan, a real one, something that would make her stop for good. And right when we thought we were getting ahead of it, Margot made her next move. 2 days later, Derek's work called him. Somehow, Margot had called his job and told them Derek was under IRS investigation. She tried to get him suspended. She told them he was being looked at for financial crimes and wasn't fit to be working around children. Derek, a high school teacher by the way. Luckily, his principal called him directly. I exactly knew it was fake and warned him. But that was it for Derek. That was the moment the switch flipped. He called his sister, and together we all sat down and compared stories. Turns out Margot had been pulling this same kind of stunt on her own daughter too. Not as extreme, but enough. Now the three of us were ready to do what we should have done from the start. We weren't just going to send in the IRS report, we were going to take the whole thing apart. The fake Airbnb names, the hidden accounts, the debts, the house transfer, the lies she told Derek, the lies she told the bank, every single detail. And while all this was happening, I got one more email, a different sender this time. This one said, "You're not the only one Margot's burned. Happy to help if you want the real dirt." And attached scans of old police reports. Margot had been reported twice in the early 2000s for fraud. Both cases dropped for a lack of evidence. But now there was a pattern, and I was starting to realize Margot's been playing this game a lot longer than I thought. If she thought I was going to back down now, she didn't know me at all. So yeah, Margot was digging herself deeper and deeper. She played her hand. Calling Derek's job, stalking me, lying about IRS investigations, and now we had police records showing her history of fraud. We had everything. But instead of slipping the papers quietly to the IRS or a lawyer like a normal person, we decided to go big because Margot had been trying to wreck my life in secret. I figured it was only fair that the truth came out in the most public way possible. Derek's sister Hannah had the perfect idea. Margot had been bragging for weeks about throwing this massive charity luncheon at her country club in WK. Real high society stuff. Dozens of people, the whole local ladies who lunch crowd, and of course she invited Derek and me. Why?
No clue.
Maybe to save face, maybe because people would ask why we weren't there if we skipped. Either way we went, and that's where it happened. We showed up early, and the place was already full of people. Big glass windows, white tablecloths, waiters carrying around little hors d'oeuvres on trays I couldn't pronounce. Margot was wearing this pale pink dress like she was queen of the world, smiling, laughing, working the room like none of this was happening. But this time we were ready. Hannah stood on one side of the room, Derek and I on the other. I waited until the main course had been served, waited until Margot was standing near the front of the room, thanking everyone for supporting the community and believing in strong family values. I almost laughed out loud at that one. Then I spoke up. Since we're talking about strong family values, I said loud enough that the whole room turned to look. I think this is the perfect time to clear up some lies. Margot froze, and before she could shut me down, Derek walked up next to me and said, "Mom, why don't you tell everyone who really owns?" As your house, you could feel the oxygen leave the room. Margot blinked like she couldn't decide whether to pretend it wasn't happening or throw her wine at us. She went with option 3. I have no idea what you're talking about, she said. Sure you do, Hannah said from the back of the room. You had Derek sign the papers years ago. You put the debt in his name. You've been using him like a personal ATM. People were whispering now. Margot's face went red. This is family business, she snapped. Not for public gossip. I shrugged. Oh, I agree, but you made it public the second you started calling Derek's work and lying about IRS investigations. You've been stalking me, Margot. You tried to get your own son fired. A few people gasped. Some of her friends were already pulling out their phones. And then came the final blow. I pulled out a folder and handed it to her right there in front of everyone. Copies of everything: the Airbnb fraud, the fake names, the bank records, the debts, the property transfer, and yes, the ready-to-mail IRS report. Margot stared at it like it was on fire. This is slander, she hissed. It's all public record, I said. Want me to read it out loud? And that's when Margot did the one thing none of us expected. She cried. Not fake tears, real ones, right there in front of all her friends. She dropped the folder on the table, covered her face with both hands and sobbed. People were leaving, some politely, some whispering to each other, clearly loving the drama. Hannah was just standing there, arms crossed, watching her mom melt down. Derek looked like someone had punched him in the gut. He wasn't angry anymore. He just looked tired, heartbroken. Margot kept repeating the same thing over and over through her tears. I didn't have a choice. I didn't have a choice. No one comforted her, not one single person, not even her best friend, who quietly grabbed her purse and left without saying a word. We left shortly after. No one really said much on the ride home that night. Derek finally admitted he felt like an idiot for not seeing it sooner. He blamed himself for signing the house papers, for giving her money for years, for thinking she was just going through a hard time instead of realizing she was drowning in secrets. I didn't blame him. Margot was good at hiding things. She made people feel guilty just for questioning her. That was her real skill. It's been a few weeks now. Margot hasn't spoken to us since that day. Last I heard, she sold the house, quietly paid off some debts, probably trying to disappear before the IRS catches up. Derek and I are still getting married. Hannah is, well, she says it's the first time in years she feels like she can breathe. And me? I'm not even mad anymore. Mostly I just feel relief. Margot tried to ruin us and all it did was set us free. It's weird when someone spends years trying to tear you down, and then when they finally fall, you don't even feel like celebrating. You just feel done, free. And honestly, that's better than revenge.